Since America was first born, women did not have the right to vote, or really the right to do anything. Since the women of the past were tired of sitting in the kitchen with no choice of who is in charge of the nation, they sought to change it. Leaders such as Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Carrie Chapman Catt, and Alice Paul led groups like the National American Women's Suffrage Association and the National Women's Party. They were thrown in jail, refused to eat, marched for hours, and stood in front of the White House for weeks on end to let the nation know that they were here and they weren't leaving until they got the rights they deserved. On August 26, 1920, the 19th Amendment was passed, and women were finally granted the right to vote by the federal government. With the 19th Amendment in place, women were thrust into the 1920s with a boom.
Women in the 20s underwent a significant change in the world of fashion. America was booming economically, and the political shifts prominently affected the social aspects, specifically of those of women. Women's rights were expanding, as were their influence on society. With the new advocacy of birth control and the expansion of women in the workplace and their right to vote, a woman's wardrobe became increasingly less conservative and eventually somewhat provocative. Skirts were cut, waistlines dropped, necklines and backs lowered, and the traditional dress was morphed into two types of dresses, the day dress and the evening dress. The day dress being longer and sleeved, and the night dress shorter and sleeveless, and possibly a two-piece ensemble consisting of a top and a skirt. The advent of new retail stores and catalogs made garments from lightweight fabrics essential. The infamous flapper image of the Roaring Twenties was reflected by younger women with possibly loose morals, with short hair, short skirts, publicly drinking and smoking, and sporting the styles of the newly influential Coco Chanel. Coco Chanel's couture designs neglected the waistline and avoided the need to define the feminine figure and let it rather be implied. Chanel's little black dress and her boyish style of the 20s liberated women and revolutionized the fashion world.
In the 1920s, after the recent achievement of women's suffrage, women started entering the workforce in retail, office typing, and other office jobs. All of these jobs were still beneath men. However, this was a major leap towards equal rights for women. Women were now actively attending school to rise out of so-called women's work. Some of the most active females were Alice Paul, who sought for an equal rights amendment to the Constitution, and Margaret Sanger, who rallied for the birth control movement. They led rallies to gain support for their movements, as well as the women's movement as a whole within America. Women also began to become well-respected politicians and established much of their notoriety in the women's movement from them and other feminists. The Christian Temperance Union, formed in 1873, was created to prohibit alcohol. Women members saw that alcohol was the cause of domestic violence, poverty, and crime. So by the 1920s, the WCTU achieved their goal of prohibition by the government passing the Prohibition Act, which prohibits the sale, consumption, and making of alcohol. Then came the birth control campaign. This was founded from the 1900s, but reached its height in the 1920s by Margaret Sanger and Emma Goldman. The birth control campaign was created in the hopes of educating women on how to control birth rates. The reason birth control was even ever needed was because of how multiple births tried women's health and how poor women would become so desperate to not have another child that they would get an illegal and dangerous abortion. This campaign, in turn, led to the Voluntary Parenthood League. The founder, Mary Ware Darnett, focused more on how to change the Comstock Act, which prohibited advertisement in the U.S. of things obscene, which included birth control ads. Members worked to put pressure on people who had the influence to make major changes to the Comstock Act. These major changes weren't added until 1929.
The expansion of professional and social opportunities in the 1920s encouraged women to apply for more professional jobs, such as social work, nursing, and teaching. For most of the poorer women, however, jobs were still underpaid. The new flapper culture that had given the women these opportunities also allowed them to wear shorter hair, shorter skirts, and experience a new world of empowerment with more social freedoms than ever before. Because of the new ideals of this era, the youth of the nation had more free time to do as they pleased. To the fright of their parents, many young girls started to reject the previous Victorian style, switching their style instead to bobbed haircuts, minuscule dresses, and a cigarette in a hand.